You're listening to the 49 Carats podcast, a 49ers Goldmine production with Stephanie Sanchez.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the 49 Carats podcast. I'm your host, Steph. It is Thursday, August 10th. The 49ers are in Las Vegas for their joint practices with the Raiders. We got reports from the first joint session today, and joining me to talk all about it is Andrew Pasquini. We had to do our own little joint session here. Yes. How are you doing today, Andrew?
I am doing fantastic. This is really, to me, the first day of football season. I know I probably said it 2 weeks ago when camp opened that like football season started today, but the Niners are practicing against a team that's not the San Francisco 49ers. So I'm sure they're very excited. So I guess today is the second of like 7 dates of like football's back, but football's back today for the second time.
For the second time, yeah. Yes. And there's some preseason games happening right now. I mean, it's not the 49ers one, so I'm not as interested. But if you guys are ignoring those games to watch us right now, appreciate that. Look, Andrew, I hate to start on a downer because I think I'm going to talk about the injury updates that we got today. And I never like to do those, especially this early in the game, but I guess it was going to come at some point, right?
Nature of the sport, dare I say.
Yeah, it is. But nature of the 49ers, it seems as well. George Kittle, he has an adductor strain and will be out about a week. Although this is the same injury that Elijah Mitchell is dealing with right now, and I think it's already been a week for him, and he hasn't returned yet, so I don't know. Of course, like there's no reason to put these guys out there and risk like re-injury or anything. So maybe they just want to keep it easy for those guys, get them to week 1. But this seems to be an annual thing with Kittle that he injures something in camp or in the preseason. In the past, it seems to have lingered and it impacts the first few weeks of the season. But hopefully this is different.
Well, yeah, hopefully it is different considering the maybe questionable depth at the tight end position. I know Ross Dwelly and Charlie Warner exist. Cam Latu's dropping passes every day. So there's a little bit of concern at the depth. I'm gonna chalk this up to just it is what it is, right? Wear and tear. It's ideally it's just a weak injury. I don't think we're gonna see too much of George Kittle for the rest of camp. Obviously, they want him to be healthy, especially with the season he had last year. And on top of that, just the tight end depth I just mentioned. So it's a little bit of a concern, but obviously it's not the biggest concern, especially considering the other injury that we're going to talk about here in a minute. It's only a week-long injury. I know you mentioned Elijah Mitchell hasn't been back yet. That one's a little less frightening as well. I just think the Niners are maybe finally erring on the side of caution with these injuries where it's like, hey, Elijah Mitchell, he doesn't need to be out there. TDP, Jordan Mason, get them there all the reps they can get because they need them a little bit more. Maybe that's just what this is with George Kittle. And George Kittle's been here for 6-7 years now, which scares me a little bit that he's been here for 7 years because it feels like it was last year he was a rookie.
Right.
He doesn't need camp, right? He doesn't need to practice. He doesn't need all this stuff. So I'm going to look a little more positive on the injury front with George Kittle at least, and just say they're going to be a little more cautious with him. There's no reason to force him at all.
See, this is why I like having Andrew on the show, because if you think that I'm pretty like objective and, look at the positive side of things, Andrew is even more so those things. And so whenever there's a panic or a slight panic, I bring him on because he'll just like bring me back down to earth. So I appreciate that, Andrew.
I try my best to have fun with this. I know the 49ers content creator space is a very stressful place. So I try my best to have as much fun as I can with it and be as positive as I can. And yeah, obviously like there is a little bit of concern, right? Because George Kittle does have an injury history. Let's be 1,000% honest. I'm not saying I'm roses and dandelions right now. I don't think that's a saying. I made that up off the top there, but it sounds like it's a pretty simple injury. It's just something that's going to hold him out for a week, and then we just won't see him until probably Pittsburgh. Let's be honest. Yeah. There's also no reason to see him until Pittsburgh. I don't think George Kittle is necessarily fighting for a position on this roster. I think he's pretty much sewn up his spot, right?
It's a bold take right there. Bold take.
Starting out hot, I know.
But look, there are more injuries to talk about. Unfortunately, Trey Greenlaw, he pulled his hamstring in practice today, so he did not finish today's session. And this is the big one, I think. Ray McCloud, he has a broken left wrist. He'll need surgery, probably out 8 weeks is what I'm hearing or what I saw on Twitter. And so that opens the door, I think, for some other guys to step up as the returner. And I think that's my concern, because let's not forget how the punt returns and kick returns looked before Ray McCloud even got to San Francisco. I think that's like I don't think we can overstate how much of an impact McCloud had, despite him being the fourth wide receiver on the depth chart. But still, I'm more concerned about his role as a return man and how we're going to miss him.
Well, yeah, I think it's kind of a double-edged sword, because you mentioned the fourth spot of the receiver. That's a very wide open thing right now, because we obviously know Debo and Ayuk probably, just like George Kittle, probably safe, right? But after that, it's Jawan Jennings, who had a bit of a drop issue last year. It's Danny Gray, it's Ray McCloud that are all really fighting for this fourth receiver spot, and that might be an important one. But you mentioned the kick return thing as well, right? And you mentioned, I was thinking, because I went the exact same place your brain went, of when's the last time we felt like we really had a consistent kick returner? Two names that came to my mind: Ted Ginn Jr., which obviously like one of the bigger names, and Allen Rossum. You remember when Allen Rossum was a Niners returner for?
No, I thought you were going to say Kyle Williams.
Jesus, we're really just going there. No, Allen Rossum, remember him with the Falcons? The Niners had him for a hot year. So yeah, I think this could be a big injury in two ways, just because we don't know where that fourth receiver is coming from yet. Obviously, Ronnie Bell, obviously Willie Snead, and Deshaun Jameson is getting a lot of attention. So we'll see what that looks like. Obviously, this is the most concerning injury at this point, just because it is the longest confirmed injury we have right now. 2 months is not a small amount of time, considering that takes you to what? I mean, 2 months from today is October 10th. That's math podcast, right? So does that mean he's ready to go October 10th, or does he need to wind up a little more? So we'll see what that leads to for Ray McCloud. But yes, I think you hit the nail on the head. The biggest concern is that return game right now. And then let's see what that fourth receiver spot, because Danny Gray, hearing good things about him right now, right, in that fourth receiver spot. So I'm very curious to see what the Niners do and how they replace that, because the return game, yes, has been very sus for a few years, to say the least. Ray McCloud came in, and it was I had confidence in the return game. So I'm interested to see how they fill that spot up.
Yeah, me too. And I was already thinking that the seventh, or was it sixth or seventh, the last roster spot that I would imagine would go to the last wide receiver that they would bring on the 53. I was already thinking that competition was pretty close, and it was going to come down to, a few guys. And now I think that makes that last wide receiver spot even more important, and it's likely going to go to a guy who can also do returns for that reason. So we'll just have to wait and see who that guy is. Certainly, like, how players position themselves in these joint practices and in these preseason games is going to help dictate that. But we'll just have to wait and see. Another injury was Drake Jackson. He didn't participate in Tuesday's practice, still not out there today. He's dealing with a hamstring injury. Not ideal, as like Nick Bosa is also missing in action, right? Still waiting for his extension. Yeah. So, it's really the edge position right now is a little thin. The depth is, right. And so it does sound like Clinton Farrell has been doing well, and that's great. He was, quote, blowing up Raiders offensive linemen during drills. But I think not ideal, right? Especially because Drake Jackson was supposed to have a, second year leap. And for this to happen at this point, not great.
Yeah, and that there is concern, obviously, right? Because the Niners lost pretty much their entire edge rushing depth this offseason, right? It's really Nick Bosa's the big one returning. Obviously, he exists still, but Drake Jackson kind of disappeared last year. Not necessarily his fault. Obviously, Shanahan had him inactive a few times, especially towards the end of the year. This is where I'm starting to get a little excited just to kind of hear what they're talking about on Clelin Ferrell, because he was because I remember back in that draft, Clelin Ferrell was the guy I low-key wanted it too, because if you remember, not over Bosa. Obviously, Bosa was obviously the big one, but you got to remember Bosa was the number one pick until the Cardinals hired Cliff Kingsbury, and that led to the Kyler Murray, which led to the Niners getting Nick Bosa. Clelin Ferrell was one of the highly touted prospects in that draft early on in that process. Kind of fell off a bit near the end. He kind of went from like a top 5 guy to a maybe middle of the first, end of the first round guy. And then the Raiders just absolutely overvalued him. That obviously, when people see that he is a 4th pick overall, he doesn't give the 4th overall pick production. But as people on the Sprint Right Option podcast want to call him Coach K, Chris Koceric, I don't like the Chris K or Coach K moniker because I'm not a big Duke guy, to be honest. But the early returns on Clelin Ferrell are sounding very nice. And really, the Niners are at a point where they need to figure out who the second edge rusher is right now. Like, they need to figure out who the second one is before they figure out that depth. And if there's any advantage that's being given right now, a player needs to take it. And early on last week and through Niners camp before they go to Vegas, you hear a lot of good things about Drake Jackson. You hear a lot of good things about Clelin Ferrell, and you're feeling good. Now that Drake Jackson's out, you're continuing to hear good things about Clelin Ferrell. And Kyle Shanahan had a quote on the Kawakami podcast a couple weeks ago after the news of Brock Purdy is healthy, he's going to be cleared, all that stuff. He had a quote specifically about the quarterback position that he doesn't believe you could lose your job to injury, but what you do give is opportunity to somebody else. And what Nick Bosa, obviously not hurt, he's out waiting for his big contract that he's going to get. And I promise you guys, he's going to get it. We don't need to worry about it. The hashtags aren't going to change anything. Like, he's going to get his contract. It's giving opportunity to Jackson and Clelin Ferrell, and we're hearing great things about both. So I'm feeling more and more confident in that position more and more. I'm very excited to see what Clelin Ferrell brings on Sunday, especially against his former team. I don't know if we're going to see Drake Jackson at this point because it is Thursday, and if we're going off of a normal week, if you miss practice on Thursday, it doesn't feel great for a game, especially a preseason game where Drake Jackson is expected to have a bigger role in the regular season. So I'm very curious to see what Clelin Ferrell looks like, because the 20 what year was Bosa drafted? 17, 18? The 2017, 18 Andrew excited for what Clelin Ferrell could have been on the 49ers when Bosa was supposed to be the first pick. I'm pretty excited to see what he can look like in 2023 with Chris Koceric, who has taken, projects on like Arden Key, Kerry Hyder, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We can name all of these that Chris Koceric has made. Why not Clelin Ferrell? And then you also mix in, I think a lot of people get so anxious about this edge position. We're not used to talking about a pass rusher in the middle. You got Javon Hargrave. You already have your second pass rusher instilled in this defense, right? It's not from the outside like we're used to, because we haven't seen an interior rusher like Javon Hargrave. So if Clelin Ferrell or Drake Jackson could just be a productive, I think the Niners defensive line has a chance to be maybe better than last year. Not as deep. The depth, I don't know if they're going to be able to match. But in terms of the top 4, where you get Bosa, Eric Armstead, I already forgot his name, Javon Hargrave, and then whether it be Drake Jackson or Clelin Ferrell, I think that has the potential. I'm not going to stick my neck out there and say it's going to be great, but I think that has a potential to be one of the better top 4 defensive lines that the Niners have seen in the Shanahan era.
For sure. I definitely agree. And in case you were wondering who filled in for, now that Drake Jackson and Nick Bosa aren't out there, who filled in? It was Clelin Ferrell. And on the other end, it was Kerry Hyder Jr., who, by all accounts, it sounds like he's been having a great camp as well. So, and he's always been a great rotational piece for the 49ers, who is productive, even though he is, further down on the depth chart. So I think that is, encouraging to get a better look at some of these guys. So we'll see how they fare throughout the preseason. But Kinlaw as well. I mean, he's doing a great job.
Yep.
And I heard today he was disrupting the pocket in one-on-one drills versus the Raiders offensive line. No surprises there since he had been doing it all in camp. So to your point, talking about Hargrave, if Kinlaw could, give you anything too, I mean, that's someone who whatever he can give you is a bonus and you'd be happy to take that. And it sounds like he's going to be a contributor as long as he is healthy. That has always been the big caveat with Kinlaw. But as of right now, and we're going to knock on wood for me because I don't have any near me, it seems like he'll have a good year.
And then I actually had a question for you real quick because you mentioned Dre Greenlaw real quick. I feel like I saw two different names replaced him. And I feel like the beat reporters had little tough luck today because it sounds like the Raiders kind of pushed, it sounds like I might have had a good view of the Raiders practice facility from Sacramento today, as some of the media did. I read that Oren Burks replaced him, but I also read that Marcelino McCray-Ball replaced him. So did you have a confirmed name on that? Because that's one of the battles I'm interested in, is that third linebacker spot.
Yeah, I mean, much of camp, I believe it has been Oren Burke, so it would make sense for him to, step up in Greenlaw's spot. And I was looking at Matt Barrow's recap from today that he put out on The Athletic. He said Oren Burks. By the way, Andrew, I finally got my own The Athletic account. For everyone listening,
shout out, yeah.
I was bumming off of Andrew's The Athletic account for a couple of years, and I finally, became an adult and just decided to get
I love that. No, that I honestly growth right there. No, you could still have my password if you want, just for memory's sake, really. But yeah, shout out. I love that. But no, I also saw JLC Jennifer Lee Chan say that McCrary Ball took snaps with Warner, so maybe they had a little bit of a rotation.
Yeah, maybe
that and the running back battle. Those are the two battles I'm you could take your QB2s and your QB3s, brother, and then leave them at home. I'm all about that RB3 and LB3 battle, and so I was very interested to see who stepped in for Greenlaw. I was interested to see if you had the same name. So it sounds like Oren Burks maybe instantly stepped in and then McCrary Ball stepped in later.
Yeah, but that's great for McCrary Paul, though, to be getting those reps and those opportunities because maybe wasn't as buzzy as he was in last year's camp as he was this year, but I still think he's a great player, and I think he's going to flash in preseason as well. So happy for him and happy for him to get those opportunities. But look, I don't think there's any reason to worry about this defensive line, but I am glad that they're going to have an opportunity to see their depth, that it seems not just the defensive line, but at many positions. And as you said, Andrew, that's some of the things that excite us just because a lot of these starting positions are already solidified. We already know who's going to be the starter. We already know who's a lock. We're now more interested in those nitty gritty battles of, who are those bubble guys and who's going to come out on top.
Yeah, and we're going to start getting those answers on the defensive line and I know we're about to talk about it, so I don't mean to lean into what we're going to bring up here in a minute. But yeah, we're going to see those battles. I think it's very exciting that Shanahan's already said we're not going to see too much of the starters because there's so many interesting battles going on. But we're going to finally get to see the defensive line and offensive line, what they actually look like, because there's only so much you can do in camp. I've almost not even looked into what people have been saying about the offensive line in terms of performance the past couple of weeks. More so just hey, Javon Kinlaw looks like he's in good shape. Those evergreen camp reports, right? Because you don't really know what they look like when they're going up head to head. And you were at camp. You probably saw a little bit more, or you not even probably, you definitely saw more than I did because I didn't go out once. But we're finally getting to see what this defensive line and offensive line, more specifically what this offensive line is going to look like. And it sounds like they had a decent day today, but they're finally playing different teams. And Sunday, we're going to finally get our first real answers about what the interior of both sides of the ball is going to look like on Sunday.
Yeah, exactly. I guess they ran some 2-on-2 drills today. The 49ers offensive line versus Raiders defensive line. And sounds like Trent Williams is still Trent Williams. Who would have thought, right?
You know what? I also, just to go out on a limb, I have written him in Sharpie to make the 53-man roster as well. So really just sticking my neck out there with the 53-man roster predictions today. I know.
I love it.
Ayuk, Debo, Kittle, Trent Williams, all locks right now.
And I have it locked that Kyle Shanahan is going to be the head coach too. He's not going to lose.
Oh yeah,
He
that's
won't be fired.
hey man, listen, not to dive in too much Premier League, but Premier League starts in 4 days, and my favorite team just let go of their coach 2 days ago. So like, I'm very like that might not be too good of a joke right now for me, just because I'm very shook by my favorite soccer team replacing their head coach 5 days before their season starts. So let's. Maybe too soon.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty bad. But yeah, Trent Williams. It sounds like he was consistently holding off Max Crosby. I only read about Trent losing like 1 rep where he was knocked down, and Aaron Banks, who returned to action today after being in the concussion protocol last week, he reportedly held up pretty well on a couple of reps too. So Colton McKivitz is the bigger question mark of this offensive line. How did he do? It sounded like he struggled a bit against Chandler Jones. I get it. Like, Chandler Jones is a very good pass rusher. And I feel like to this point in camp, McKivitz hasn't really been tested because Nick Bosa hasn't been there. So we'll see how he does tomorrow, right? Can he turn it around? But yeah, by all accounts, it sounds like he had an up and down day versus Crosby. Won some reps, lost some as well.
Yeah, and I read that the rep that Trent Williams lost was to Chandler Jones as well. So Chandler Jones is very good at football. Let's be honest. So maybe that's why Colton McKivitz struggled today. There is a lot that's probably the biggest question mark for me on if and I think that's pretty obvious. I think Colton McKivitz is, if you go all 22 starting positions right now on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball, that right tackle is probably the biggest question right now. And I don't want to put too much pressure on anybody right now, but all those people the past few years that are like, oh, you have to be able to do better than Mike McGlinchey, right? Like, let's see what Colton McKivitz can do, because that is easily the biggest concern right now. The Raiders, this is the perfect team though, right? For the first camp against another team, because I don't know how many teams have a better pair of pass rushers than the Las Vegas Raiders do right now, and Max Crosby and Chandler Jones. So it's a very good test. I think this is a very, dare I say, not to get too into hyperbole of preseason, iron sharpens iron, right? And that's what this is. So ideally, Colton McKivitz is learning, tweaking things here and there to figure it out. He's going to have a tough matchup today, tomorrow. I don't know. I haven't looked too much into what the Raiders are planning to do on Sunday yet. I don't know if they're planning to play Max Crosby or Chandler Jones. I don't even know if Colton McKivitz is going to play. If we're going by the logic of Shanahan's not going to play too many starters, I think he should probably play Colton McKivitz a little bit. But if he doesn't, it'll make sense because he is the starter. He already said he isn't. But yeah, I'm interested to see an Aaron Banks too, because Aaron Banks felt like he was a guy who was written off a couple of years ago after his first rookie camp, right? People were like, oh, he doesn't look as good as what they thought. But obviously he had a pretty good year last year, and it sounds like he's really improving. I read from, I believe Grant Cohn said he didn't lose anything in one-on-ones today. So that's a good sign. If the Niners can get that left side of the line very short up, a second year, I really think as long as Trent Williams is there, Aaron Banks is going to improve every season. I think you saw that a little bit with, I'm horrible at my job. What's his, who do you replace? Who did Banks replace? He signed with the Jets.
Oh my God. It's
on the tip of my tongue.
My
Jets. Jets.
Lakin
right.
Tomlinson.
Lakin Tomlinson. Yeah.
I just have really bad memory.
No, yeah, I'm horrible. It's because I live in California and certain things are legal in California. It makes the memory hazy. But yeah, Lakin Tomlinson, he was pretty good with the Niners, right? And not to say he had a bad year with the Jets, but it didn't feel like he was quite what he was with the Niners. And I think obviously there's, dare I say, that Trent Williams bump right on that left side of the line. So every year Aaron Banks gets a chance to work with Trent Williams, I think you're going to see a steady progression with him every single year.
Yeah, I think so. And it's been great for his development. It sounds like too, and I read this too, Keith, shout out for this comment. David Lombardi from The Athletic said he was talking with Max Crosby along with Williams about pointers. So he being Colton McKivitz. So there was a lot of exchanging of tips and information between those guys. And, we've heard about Trent doing the same with Nick Bosa. So I think it's cool that, they want to trade that information with, other teams and as well. So That's good, and that's good for Colton McKivitz. I don't know if I'm worried about Colton McKivitz. Like, I'm trying hard to not be. I think there is naturally going to be some drop-off between him and
Mike McGlinchey. I
Mike.
got you. That one I won't forget. I'm a big Mike McGlinchey guy, dare I say.
Well, because we're
Mitch
talking about McKivitz,
Wishnowsky
and then
right
I was
tackle,
like, Mick.
yes.
All right, yeah. Sorry, former number 69. Yeah, so I think that there's naturally going to be some drop off, but I'm not ready to count him out yet because it is training camp. It is the preseason, and him looking up and down, him looking shaky at times, that happens at this time of the year, especially if this is your first time being a starter, right? So I think once things get going, once they start game planning and all these things against whoever he's going to be going up against, it's a different ball game. So, and also keep in mind, we will probably hear about the Raiders defensive line looking good at times. Keep in mind that George Kittle isn't out there, the best, blocking tight end in the league. So that helps.
And I think what people really, and this is what my vibe on it with the right tackle. I think Kyle Shanahan was, I'm not going to say okay, but I'm going to say okay with some of Mike McGlinchey's pass rushing reps. He always had that one play that everybody would circle, as long as he was consistent in the run game, because I really feel like that Kyle Shanahan values that run blocker on that right side. So listen, there's going to be growing pains with Colton McKivitz, right? If he's showing bad reps in the passing game, I think Kyle Shanahan can live with it as long as he's good enough in the run game. Now, where the issue comes in is if he starts struggling in the run game, that's where the conversations are going to start coming up, where it's like, okay, maybe Jalen Moore. We're gonna show how bad we are with our memory here against Steph. Who was the right tackle that nobody liked behind Mike McGlinchey? He stepped in for week 17. Against week 18 against the Rams a couple years ago. He was the backup. Oh my God. We're great. We're showing great man. We're so focused on 2023.
Why do you keep bringing up older players?
Because I remember these things. I'm pulling up rosters now. No, he was the backup right tackle. Tom Compton, right? He was good enough in the run game to earn that spot, right? Yeah. And that's kind of all we were looking at. Shout out Keith, by the way, Sprint Red Option Podcast. He's there all the time as well. Thank you very much for helping me with my memory, Keith. But yeah, so it's that same sort of thing. Like, I think Kyle Shanahan's okay with giving up a little bit in the pass game as long as that right tackle is very good in the run game. So that's where I think Colton McKivitz is going to have to shine.
Yeah, I agree. Portola45 says, read OT coach Forster's comments, finally recognizing Poe's limitations. That is Jason Poe, who's been playing some guard, and I think in the past he's done center as well. I like Poe. I think that from what I've seen, he's done all right. Does he have limitations? Yes, he's a very small guy, but he wins reps like he's not supposed to. You see him going up against guys in one-on-one, and you're like, there's no way he's going to beat this guy, and he does. So he does have limitations, which is why, you probably won't see him ever be a starter in this league, but he could be a fine fill-in at times. With good potential, I think. So let's see how he does in the preseason. I'm excited for that one. But Andrew, let's talk about the quarterbacks, right? We've gone nearly 30 minutes without bringing up the quarterbacks. What's up with that?
I know, right?
Good for us.
I love it. I love us for that.
It sounded like Jimmy Garoppolo.
That's the quarterback you start with? I thought we were going Trey Lance. I love it. No, go ahead. Continue. I love it. Let's go. Jimmy Garoppolo.
Well, I just want to get it out of the way.
Yes.
It sounded like Jimmy Garoppolo had a pretty good practice. It seemed like he and Devontae Adams, one of the best receivers in the league, had their way with the first team defense today. And he led a nice 2-minute drill, capped off with a touchdown to Austin Hooper. But that's my quota. Like, I've met my Jimmy Garoppolo quota.
Well, yeah, I was explaining to my girlfriend who doesn't watch much football. She knows who Jimmy Garoppolo is before the podcast. I'm like, I'm so excited we get to talk about Jimmy Garoppolo. And she goes, babe, I've heard you for the last 2 years, like talk about how you're tired of talking about Jimmy Garoppolo. And I straight up said, yeah, I was tired about talking about 49er Jimmy Garoppolo. I could talk Raider Jimmy Garoppolo all day, you know? But yeah, I mean, if you went into my Twitter thread, if we're believing in a multiverse world, right? That Jimmy Garoppolo to Austin Hooper hookup is a Niner play, right? Like, let's be honest. Kyle Shanahan wishes he had that. But yeah, it sounds like he had a pretty good day in camp today. I'm happy that he seems to be thriving in Vegas. At least the early returns are saying he's doing good. I think it was time for a change of scenery for him. Obviously, that was the case. I think it gets a little weird. I mean, like, it's to a point where, like, my Jimmy Garoppolo thing, like, I have my MacBook here. For some reason, when I like scroll down to here, like a little picture of Jimmy Garoppolo pop. I don't know how that happened, but like I scroll and there's a little.
Who got a hold of your laptop? And
I don't know.
Like,
I don't know
that
how that happened. I don't know what. Anyways, I wanted to show that off. I don't know why Jimmy Garoppolo does that. I don't know how that happens. His MacBook is new too. Like, I've only had it for a couple months. But anyway, that's gonna be a great visual for the audio listeners on this podcast, by the way. But yes, back to the point. Jimmy Garoppolo, he sounds like he did well. It sounds like he did pretty well in that 2-minute drill, which I think like Niner fans should semi be used to, because that was kind of the enigma of Jimmy Garoppolo, was he would struggle for 3 quarters, and then the 4th quarter he'd look like what we all thought he could be at some points. But yeah, man, I'm genuinely happy for him. And now that I don't have to talk about him every week, I'll probably watch him quite a bit and enjoy him and enjoy the ride. It's good to see that he seems like, good for you. You look happy and healthy, you know. Not to mention Olivia Rodrigo. She's got a new single coming out, by the way, tonight. But yeah, I'm very happy. It sounds like he's doing well out there.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, you said that, and I was like, I recognize those words.
Yes. Hey,
I'm excited for her new single. But
new single tonight. Shout out.
Let's talk about the 49ers quarterbacks.
Yes.
And that does not.
Oh, wait, we're not going other 49ers former quarterback Brian Hoyer talk yet?
I am not wasting a second on
no,
Brian
we don't.
Hoyer.
I'm joking.
We don't need an interception today.
We don't need to talk about Brian Hoyer today. Yeah, he did throw an interception today.
Classic 49ers legends. All right, all around, all across the board in Las Vegas. But Purdy, he was 10 of 16, depending on who you ask, right? I think someone had him 10 of 17 or something like that. He had 2 touchdowns in the red zone, 1 to TDP, another to CMC, which should tell you, draft these 49ers running backs in fantasy. Yeah. I mean, obviously. He also had 1 interception by Raiders cornerback Duke Shelley. Andrew, I like Purdy, and I see what the 49ers like in him. I understand 100% why he is the starting quarterback. But people seem to be concerned about the interceptions. Yeah. And I'm curious about your stance again, because you always you just always explain things so well that puts me at ease.
Yeah, I decided last week that I'm kind of over the stats side of these camps. I've been looking more at the reps. I think the reps have been telling a little bit more of a story. Are the interceptions concerning in a vacuum? Sure. I also like to believe that in camp, you maybe try and get away with a little more things, try and make throws that not necessarily you're going to make in game. So maybe, obviously, I'm not seeing these throws. Like, full disclosure, I'm not seeing these throws. So I don't have a reference point. But I do like to believe that you're taking a little bit more chances in practice compared to game situations, right? I think he's going to be a little more conservative. The turnovers weren't too much of an issue last year with him. That's why the Niners offense seemed to be humming a little bit more at the end of the season when he stepped over. But yeah, Keith makes a great point here. Practice makes perfect for game day, right? So like that's another way to look at it, right? But I guess to make a long conversation short, I am yes and no concerned about the interceptions. Is that fair? Like, yes, it is concerning that it seems to happen a frequency of every day. Does that mean he's going to throw 7 interceptions a game to continue his 1 interception per day average? No, absolutely not, right? That's not going to happen. But let's wait and see. Let's wait and see to see what this looks like in games. Because if we're talking in week 4, right, week 3, week 4, and he's at 4, 5, 6 interceptions, then yes, I'm very concerned. Right now, to quote Allen Iverson, we're talking practice, not a game. We're talking practice. So that's where the no concern steps in. It's just practice. Maybe he's trying things that he's not necessarily going to try in games. So does that answer your question? Just right down the middle.
It does. And I have a very, similar opinion because when I watched him at camp last year, I could see that he was throwing a lot of interceptions.
Mhm.
And then we heard that, the 49ers liked him and they chose to keep him on the roster over Nate Sudfeld. That's why that never made sense to me because I saw him in camp and I was like, well, he seems to be throwing a lot of interceptions. Was really good in situational periods, which tracks with what we've seen of Brock Purdy.
Mhm.
But to your point, I do think that he is the type of quarterback who tries some things out in practice and in camp that he normally wouldn't. I mean, I think even Kyle Shanahan said that was one of the things that they liked about him. He took risks.
Mhm.
And so I think that is a lot of what we're seeing with the interceptions in practice. Also, he had a comment earlier today. He was asked, how his arm is feeling, because I guess it had been a while since he had talked to the media and people are always still wondering about his arm. I will share that with you guys right now, what he said.
Yeah. In terms of my arm and everything. Yeah. My arm feels great. Just still building back-to-back days and, trying to gain all the strength that I can back from obviously just the rehab process of things. And I feel really confident. So.
Yeah, and the reason that I wanted to share that clip was because I saw a lot of people talking about what he said, like out of context, really. And I always like to get the video if I can. To me, it doesn't concern me that he's saying like he's still trying to get his, arm. I don't know the exact word he said, velocity, strength. I don't know what he said, but it doesn't concern me. I mean, I think that's just part of getting over the hump of your surgery. And yes, he is 100% cleared at this point. That's all we need to know, right? So I think it's fine that he's throwing interceptions. Also, Al Sacco had a thread that I thought was really interesting. And now, let's see, maybe I share that too, because he was basically saying like 49ers quarterbacks under Kyle Shanahan, they throw interceptions. It's what they do. And you have to also remember within the context of Kyle Shanahan's offense, it makes a whole lot of sense because a lot of those throws are in the middle of the field and they're more susceptible to being in traffic and getting intercepted. So I think it makes sense. So here's what the tweet says. Kyle Shanahan's coached 242 regular season games in 15 years as an offensive coordinator or head coach in the NFL. His quarterbacks have thrown 235 interceptions. So, I mean, the proof is kind of in the pudding that, and he lays it out year by year in 2016, 7, 2012, 8, 2022, 9, 2019, 13, 2021, 14, every other season with 15 plus interceptions. So I think there's a sample size that tells us that maybe this is more than just the quarterback. Maybe it's just the type of offense, right? And again, putting into the context, there's a lot of throws to the middle of the field, and those naturally are going to be in danger of being intercepted more so than others.
Yeah, and just to go back on in terms of the quote, I mean, we got to remember that he had a pretty major elbow injury. We saw how bad it was. It wasn't a thing where it's like, hey man, like just give what you can. He had nothing to give. So like, I don't want to say it's a complete restart for his arm, but it was a pretty major surgery. So like, I think I don't have any concern with him saying, hey, I need to work it back up because I think that's pretty obvious, right? It's like a pitcher in baseball. You get that he didn't have Tommy John surgery, I know that, but you get that Tommy John surgery and the velo drops a little bit, right? It's an elbow surgery. The The elbow, dare I say, that not to be an anatomy podcast, but the elbow, dare I say, is the knee of the arm. And we all know how bad knee injuries can be. And we're talking about his throwing arm. So I no concern from me in terms of him saying he needs to work it back up. I think that's pretty obvious. And that's why they're doing this 2 day on, 1 day off thing, just to kind of let him feel it out. So yeah, I no concern to me at all in terms of the health of Brock Purdy. And again, yes and no concern for the interceptions.
Yeah, I think he'll be fine. I naturally do think there'll be some regression with him, but I don't think it'll be to a point where you're begging for him to be benched. So I'll leave it at that. But the guy who may potentially be behind him on the 53 on the depth chart, Trey Lance, he was 6 of 12 today, also led a solid 2-minute drill that would have probably ended up with a touchdown. It was on 4th down. Had Cameron Latu not dropped the pass, I know you mentioned this early, Andrew, but this, I want to talk about this for a bit because it's starting to really irk me. Latu has the yips. He had 2 drops on Tuesday's practice as well, according to Matt Barrows. A number of drops littered throughout camp. All while people keep telling me he's a lock to make the 53 just because he was drafted in the 3rd round. That doesn't sit right with me right now.
No, and I mean, I guess the joke is kind of built in that like he does fit the mold of a Kyle Shanahan receiver. He likes to drop the ball because the Niners tend to like to drop the ball, right? I mentioned Jawan Jennings had a high drop percentage. Brandon Ayuk has his issues. Debo has his issues. But yeah, it's this is a bit concerning because like this is almost a daily occurrence. I mean, it's not almost a daily occurrence. It has been a daily occurrence. And that's where the concern of the Kittle injury comes in a little bit, right? Because we don't really like Kittle exists. He's tight end 1. The Niners took 2 swings in the draft at tight end to kind of solve that second tight end spot because they haven't been able to really figure it out. I mean, you look at the names they've run through: Tyler Kroft, Levine Tololo. I was bad at pronouncing that name when he was a Niner. Jordan Reed, right? The Niners have tried to solve the second tight end spot. So now they're taking 2 swings, right? And I was hoping Sam Laporta would drop to them. I don't think that was ever going to happen. But yeah, it's a bit of concern because I feel like a lot of what I read about Cameron Latu was he's a run blocking tight end, right, out of college. And the Niners use a 3rd round pick on him when I believe Braden Willis was 5th, 6th, 7th, 3rd. We'll just say 3rd day draft, right? Braden Willis was a 3rd day draft pick. The drops are very concerning, and it doesn't help. Like, and that's why I don't like these numbers, right? Is because Trey Lance should have had a touchdown today, right? He should have had an extra touchdown. Latu drops the ball. I feel bad for Trey Lance, and I don't think that's a hot take at this point. Not to take your tight end conversation and bring it to Lance.
No, I mean we got to talk about Lance.
How do I word this? Because I don't want people taking a clip from your podcast, Steph, and saying Andrew hates Trey Lance, because I like Trey Lance. I do like Trey Lance. I think he is either the 1st or 2nd best quarterback on this team because we don't really know what he is. I don't think he's going to win this QB2 battle, and it has nothing to do with his talent. I think if you ask me right now, and I think Steph, if I ask you this question, if I ask any of these beautiful people in the comments section, if you're starting a franchise right this second, who are you taking, Trey Lance or Sam Darnold? I think everybody's saying Trey Lance. Unfortunately, with Kyle Shanahan, I don't think it necessarily comes down to the talent. I think it's very obviously comes down to the trust. Who does he trust running this offense? There's a reason. I don't remember necessarily because it was March. Sam Darnold was one of the first players that the 49ers signed. There was a reason for that. Trey Lance was going to be here regardless. I know we were concerned about the Brock Purdy injury back in March, and we weren't sure what it was going to look like. But these reports coming out of camp, like Trey Lance is looking good, but it really feels like that Darnold's, I don't know. I got confused there. Darnold's gaining steam, even though it sounds like Lance is outperforming him every day. And then it makes your brain go back to the reports of Shanahan wanted Mac Jones at 3, right? Like whether or not that was true or not, I don't know. But it sounds more or less that's true, right? I'm afraid that we're kind of working our way to a situation where Trey Lance isn't going to be on this roster, whether it be at the end of this camp or at the end of the season. I don't think the Niners are going to move off him at this point. I think he'll be the third quarterback. Whether or not he sits with that, I don't know. But I'm really afraid we're getting to a point where Trey Lance is going to go somewhere else and flourish, right? Because I think he does have that skill set. And it's not necessarily his fault that it's not working. No, it's not his fault that it's not working out here. It's 100% a Kyle Shanahan thing. I don't know. I don't know where they go with Trey Lance at this point, but I don't think it's QB2 at this point. Not because he's not as good as Sam Darnold. It just feels like there's some disconnect between him and Kyle Shanahan, and that's just kind of where we're at.
I think for me, I mean, obviously, I know that Lance was Kyle Shanahan's pick, and whether he changed his mind at some point in the draft process, like I don't know when exactly that happened, but he chose Trey Lance. Now, somewhere down the line, like maybe his feelings did change a little bit to where now he's competing for the backup spot. And so while I think if Purdy wasn't in the picture, I think you'd be looking at Lance and you would say, yeah, let's roll with Lance because he has improved a ton and he has that ceiling that you don't really know what his ceiling is because again, like you said, we don't know what he is, but he has the skill set, you know that. So as long as he continues to build on that, he could be a really good starting quarterback in the NFL. But Purdy is in this situation. Purdy is here. He is the quarterback one on this team. And as long as that's true, Lance, I think like me and you are probably feeling some of the same thing because when I see Lance, I don't think he's an ideal backup. And the reason for that is because I think that he still has a lot of developing to do. And the only way that he's going to be able to develop is if he gets the reps.
Yeah.
And you're not going to develop by being thrown into the fire like, Brock Purdy did. I mean, maybe, but I just don't see it with Lance because every day of practice, he would get his reps or he'd have his days and he would start off kind of slow. He starts off slow and he kind of like builds momentum as practice goes on. I think Matt Barrow said the same thing in his article recapping today. And he noted that is a theme with Lance. That's not a quality of an ideal backup. And so I think that's the issue. Like we all know that Lance has the talent to be a starter and eventually a really good starter in the NFL, but not a backup is not his ideal role at this time. And so that's why I think like we're kind of seeing the same thing. And that's why, even though it feels like you said, Lance is outperforming Sam Darnold in much of these practices, and yet it still feels like this competition is close for some reason. Why is that? So I think we're sensing about the same thing. I'm not happy about it. I was talking to Vish about it and I was like, if it were up to me, like you were asking me who's the three top quarterbacks on the team, it's Purdy, Lance, and Darnold in no particular order. But I'd keep those three guys. And, he brought up the fact that, it's not always that simple. The money comes into it, of course, the business decisions. I do understand that. But also we touched on the fact that being a backup is kind of a specific role in itself. And again, like I don't know if I see Lance having that being great at that role.
But it's funny because you mentioned this point. I hadn't thought of this because you mentioned like Lance not being a backup compared to Darnold, and dare I say we're going to have our second knock on wood of the episode. But I could see a world where we enter the season with a quarterback depth chart of Purdy, Darnold, Lance, and a world where if Purdy gets hurt again, Lance takes over. Maybe not for that one game. Darnold, I think, would be prepared to step in for the game where Purdy gets hurt. Knock on wood, obviously, continuing to knock on wood. But I could see a world where Lance would jump in the next week as the starter. So like that's a very interesting point you bring up because a couple of weeks ago, when we remember the great like Brandon Allen's getting as many reps as the other two guys wars. Remember when we were panicking over that? That's when I thought maybe Brandon Allen's the QB3 and they're moving from Lance. I've moved off that thought. I think Lance is going to be here. But man, you make a great point with that. That I have not thought of it from that angle. And that's why I like you, and that's why I like Vish, because you guys look at different angles, and that's a very good point. I could absolutely see a world where Purdy gets hurt, Lance jumps over Darnold to take the starting spot.
That's a good point too, because like based on what each quarterback is good at, like Lance would make a whole lot of sense to jump over Darnold in that case. Mm-hmm. That isn't something that typically happens in the NFL, but this is a weird quarterback room in a weird situation for the 49ers. But to your point, like if they keep Trey Lance and he is, say, the third quarterback on the roster, I don't know how long they can do that for. Like, do you really want to pay your QB3, I don't know, 9-10 million, however much he's getting paid this year, to be third on the depth chart? I mean, I think that's why it just makes more sense to move off of Lance if that's how they feel about him and if they're worried about the money. But it would be so simple, I think, for me as a fan to say just keep all three of these guys because of the injury history that they've had, and also just keep the best three guys on the roster. Like, why not? But easier said than done.
It's such a complicated situation. And I just feel like a lot of these, like, nothing against Twitter takes because it's Twitter, right? But I just feel like a lot of these Twitter takes are oversimplifying it, right? It's if it came down to who the best quarterback was, I think Trey Lance is up there, right? Like maybe Purdy, maybe Lance, and I think that's the conversation. But realistically, we're talking about a head coach that and obviously different positions, but the concept of the Shanahan doghouse does exist. And you had a running back in Matt Breida where he was the Niners running back one for a good chunk of time. And then fumble issues kind of came up and he was out the door the next offseason, right? And so it's weird because there's so much of Shanahan's ego. And I don't say that in a negative way. I think to be an NFL head coach, you've got to have an ego. You think Bill Belichick got through because he was the nicest guy in the world? Absolutely not. But it's really strange that Shanahan just can't seem to figure out this quarterback situation outside of the idea of, dare I say, Kirk 2024.
I knew yes. If you weren't going to say it, I was going to.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like all this effort, all this conversation about the 2023 quarterback situation. It's probably just going to go out the window next year because it doesn't matter, right? And like that's a bad way to look at it. But yeah, it's such a complicated situation because of who Kyle Shanahan is and how much trust or how important trust is to him. That's why I think you see Trey Lance sliding. I mean, Sam Darnold, you remember when the Jets traded him, the Niners were allegedly in on him before Trey Lance was here. So you're talking about a guy on this roster that the Niners were maybe looking to replace Jimmy Garoppolo with 2 years ago. And now all of a sudden he is I believe, the first or second guy you sign in the offseason this year. And you're trying to tell me that he is all of a sudden just competing for QB2 over the guy that you traded 2 draft picks for or 2 first-round picks for and flipped another first-round pick to get. That's where the concern comes in. As I said, I understand in a vacuum why people are upset and confused about the Trey Lance situation, but everything else around it, it's kind of playing out how it probably was always going to play out. And it's unfortunate. I don't mean, and I hate this like hot take world where like I say this stuff and people are going to be like, oh, he just doesn't like Lance. No, I like Trey Lance a lot. At 3, I wanted either Fields or Lance, right? That's who I wanted at 3. It's just there's a difference between what I think and what everybody on social media thinks and the reality of the situation. And the reality of the situation is the Niners went out and signed a guy that they tried to trade for 2 years ago. And that should kind of raise a red flag. So where that leaves us, I don't know, Steph, but nobody knows until the decision's made at this point. I honestly don't even think Kyle Shanahan knows at this point.
If that's the case, then I'm really concerned. Like, I know
no,
that's
yeah.
not
Well,
like,
I think he knows
play
who
now.
QB1 is, obviously. I
Yeah.
know he knows who QB1 is,
Quite
but I
confident.
don't think he knows who QB2 is at this point. But it just feels really weird because all you're hearing is, hey, Lance is looking good. Lance is looking good. But for some reason, it feels like Darnold's trending to QB2, and there's got to be a reason for it.
Yeah. It doesn't help that we keep hearing like national media saying, pretty much singing that same tune that Darnold's QB2. Whether that's just their opinion or something they're hearing from inside the building, I don't know. But I know the only guy who knows and is going to make this decision final is Kyle Shanahan. That's the only person. So only his opinion matters, and we do not know what that opinion is, and we won't until the official 53-man roster drops. But I mean, yeah, there's a lot of nuance to this situation, and it's pretty, I'm not going to lie, it's entertaining because at least we know who QB1 is. So like at this point, everything else is just kind of, it's not as, I guess, grueling as it has been in years past. But Andrew, it has been a lot of fun. We're at 55 minutes.
Yes.
It's been a lot of fun talking football with you. But I do understand that you had some names for our show.
Yes. So we share a podcast host. We do.
We do. Yeah.
I have this little
Jason
thing called the Spirit Right Option podcast with Jason Aponte. You have this thing called the Bully Ball podcast with Jason Aponte. So I figured we should have a tag team name. So I have four suggestions. So Dude and Not a Dude Talk Ball. Just shout out your Twitter bio, right? Because that's your Twitter bio. The easy one for the alliteration is Aponte's Angels, like just a spinoff of Charlie's Angels. This one's more in the wrestling realm, and I don't know if we cuss on this podcast, so if we do, I'm sorry. But the Ass Boys, ASS, A for Andrew and Steph Sanchez, and then Boys, BOIS, not BOYS. And then my favorite, because it's an oldie but a goodie, the Queens of 49er Twitter.
I love that. I love all of them. I think that'll be our spinoff. We'll figure out the exact name later. But I just want to shout you out. I've been thinking about it because I feel like you are one of my favorite 49er content creators, not just for the Nick Bosa videos, but for the content you produce, the amount of draft information you get out there. If I had to have a Mount Rushmore of 49er content creators, it would probably be, legally have to say Jason Aponte, Jordan Elliott, Brad Graham, and Steph Sanchez. That's my four. And there's so many other great ones that I'm leaving out that they're, Rob Guerrero's stats. We love stats. Jesse Naylor's a good one. Grant Cohn. I know a lot of those people I don't agree with, but I respect everybody's football opinion. I'm sure everybody's very good people out, in real life, because I just assume everybody's a nice person. But yeah, man, you are definitely in my Mount Rushmore of 49er content creators. And any time that I get the 49 Carats podcast bump, I'm going to take it whenever I can. Because honestly, man, like we tend to talk about it every time we do this together. Like, hey, next time we should probably go like 30, 35-ish minutes. But like we have so much fun talking about this. And I feel like that we work so well together that like, if you didn't say we've gone for 50 minutes, I would have thought we were 30 minutes in. So I just want to shout you out for all the hard work you do. Not just because, like, dude, you live in Denver, correct? Or no, sorry, I shouldn't dox you. Like, you live in Colorado, right? And you're out there for all 2 weeks of camp. You're out there grinding. I was this year. I only did 1 week. But
okay, sorry. I live in Sacramento and I did 0 whole days, Steph. So like I just want to shout you out because you're out there working hard. You're giving people the content they need. And I just shout out you, especially during the draft season, getting all that information of who the Niners visit, all that stuff. So I just wanted to make sure I was able to say all of this because you are one of, if not my favorite 49er content creator. And anytime you ask me to be on, I'm moving mountains to be here.
Well, Andrew, now you're making me blush on my own podcast.
I got you.
Like my cheeks red a little bit, just a little bit.
Actually, I had another name real quick. I had Steph and Ann podcast, and then we could just kind of play it off like it used to be Angie, but now it's Andrew.
I love all of those. I mean, like now we're like legally obligated to have a reoccurring show, I think, because
I know that's why I pitched the name. Like honestly, like this notepad, it have my notes, and like this is all the football notes, and then this is the podcast name notes. But this was the first thing. The podcast name notes were the first thing written down. Like I was like, I need to get these off. I gotta brainstorm these first, and then we'll worry about Niners camp.
Yeah, I mean it's secondary, obviously.
Yeah, who cares, man? It's practice. No, I'm joking. I love this. I'm very excited. This is a good time of year. We love this time of year.
We love it. I mean, real football is back. Andrew, I appreciate you so much, and thank you for all those kind words. You are far too kind for saying all of those things about me, but I appreciate you being on. And like you said, it's always a pleasure talking football with you, and hopefully we could do this again soon.
I'm always down to talk football with you, Steph. I'm down to talk anything with you, to be honest. It doesn't have to be football. We can have a friendship outside of the
right. Yeah. I know.
How's your life? Like, how's life going? You know, we just want to talk life for the next hour.
I think we just need to like FaceTime. Like, yeah, we just need to have like.
You have my phone number. We can talk whenever you want. Hey, should we tease the project we're working on a little bit?
Yes, do it. I wanted to mention it, but I didn't know if.
So like I kind of tease it on the podcast. That's how I got Dawson involved. So Steph and I, we'll talk about it a little bit here. Me being the ADHD human being I am terrible with the draft when it comes to like, because like it's NFL season, and then you get like a month to learn 975 names for the next month and a half, and you have to know all of them to be a content creator. So we're working on a bit of a project where we're getting the draft notes out early. We're gonna start working on getting notes for all these guys. We got a list of about probably 200 names already so far, and I'm probably going to add a little bit to that tonight. We're going to try and have a draft guide ready to go day after the Super Bowl. That's our goal. We're going to work on it early, but if we don't get, and I've already thrown it out there to you, Josh Eccles, and Dawson, that like if we don't reach that goal, like we just don't mention this ever again. Like we just don't talk about like how we said we want to get it out for the Super Bowl. But yeah, ultimately our goal, instead of trying to learn all these prospects, the second the Super Bowl ends, is to have more of a knowledge of them as the season happens. So we already have, I think, 200 names. I've already decided that the Joe Alt is going to be the Niners draft pick, a right tackle out of Notre Dame. Sound familiar, guys? But Kool-Aid McKinstry is also the name I want. So just because it's Kool-Aid, but yeah. So that's a little bit of a project we're working on.
And Andrew's doing most of the heavy lifting. But
right now,
I am supporting, and I love it, Andrew. I think it's a great idea. I hope that once it's finally out, you guys enjoy it. And yeah, I mean, again, Andrew, thank you so much for joining me today. All you guys who tuned in, make sure you like this video. Make sure you subscribe. Audio listeners, make sure you follow the podcast. Leave a rating if you're feeling lucky. Well, I don't know, I said that, but if you're feeling good, just leave a rating. And have a good rest of your Thursday, people. Peace.